Hey guys, welcome back to Sell Ready Podcast. Today's guest is Michael Bush. He's the founder of Growthways and also the creator of Guardrailing. The Guardrailing framework, the methodology is really designed to help leaders make better decisions, scale more effectively, build more valuable companies. So throughout his career, he's been able to help navigate growth, operational challenges, and successful exits. So I'm very, very excited to interview you, Michael. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Look, can we start off? Tell me a bit more about what you guys do at Growthways.
So we're an advisory firm that works primarily with investor-backed companies or companies that are designed to scale, grow, and exit. I'm not one that is, comfortable in this space of growing a public company or, that's going to hand down legacies and things like that. But we've developed over many, many years a process where we've helped people identify where they want their business to go and how specifically to get there and how to make a bunch of decisions and more importantly, how to not make a bunch of decisions that add value to the business and that don't detract from the business. And so we work with anywhere from, full blown startups that are trying to figure out their way to companies that have already done an A or B round and they're, maybe getting prepared a year or two away from an exit. And, maybe they're in an inflection point where they need to make some big decisions and they may be growing in a direction where it's not maximizing that exit value. And so we spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs, lots of time with investors on the private equity and venture capital side. And it's a blast because you can watch these companies go from struggling to find their footing or what we call their final destination. And the goal then is not just to exit a business, but it's to create a business so that when you exit that business, whoever buys that business from you, whether it's a strategic or a private equity firm, they want to buy in the next business you built because that business has value far beyond the founder, the brand of the business because most companies aren't buying, the brand of a business. They're buying what that business does. And so we're trying to show people how do you grow your business so that it has long-term value to whomever, owns that business long-term.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And let me ask you, is it a specific type of business that you guys are working with? Are you guys pretty agnostic? Where you're working with, the blue collar, the professional services, white collar, or do you guys specialize in a specific type of business owner?
So I tend to focus primarily on kind of the natural products industry, branded ingredients. So we kind of are in the middle of what you would call food tech all the way through biotech. And we've done work with SaaS businesses and things like that. We don't do a ton with kind of, your blue collar, founder operated, contractors and things like that. It's just not my forte. Kind of grew up in the healthcare environment and then switched from healthcare to biotech and then into natural products. Our last company was a probiotic ingredient company. And so I spend a lot of time focusing on B2B businesses. And then we're doing more and more work now with D2C brands or brands that are expanding into retail. But a lot of our clients deal with, if you find it in Whole Foods or if you find it at a grocery store or at, Walgreens, those are typically our clients. We don't do a whole lot when it comes to pharma and things like that. We like products that are accessible, that are easy to get to, and that are clinically backed. And so, kind of the area we focus on.
Okay, okay, great, great, great. So,
Mhm.
those direct to consumer brands, more so with the product, food engineering
Yeah,
side of businesses. Okay, that's amazing. Okay, I'm really
yeah.
excited to learn more about this today. Tell me a little bit more about you, Michael. Tell me something about your entrepreneur journey from to this point.
Well, so I am a very non-traditional entrepreneur. So I didn't get my bachelor's degree till I was almost 40. I think we had 4 or 5 exits by that time. And so I started out as a biomedical technician in hospitals working on medical equipment. And it turned out I was really bad at that. And that's not something, that you want to be bad at. You don't want to be the worst guy fixing medical devices, especially it might be used on you on the way home or your family members. And so I kind of had a revelation that I enjoyed the business side of kind of the healthcare and asset management and things like that. And so wound up working for a company and getting my first management job when I was like 25. because no one else wanted to be a manager in this environment, in this healthcare services environment. And so that company was about to do, I worked there about a year. And like I said, I was like 25. And the company was about to do an acquisition. And I just sent a note to the CEO who I'd met a couple of times. And I said, hey, I understand you're about to do this acquisition. I don't know anything about acquisitions. I don't really know much about business. I've never taken a business class, but I'd love to learn more about it. And if you need any help, I'd like to help. And so he and I got together for lunch, and he said, this is a full-time job. You have a full-time job. If you would like two full-time jobs and no more pay, the job's yours. And so the next thing you know, I was working, basically, I worked 7 to 3:30 or 7 to 4 in the hospitals that we were servicing mainly around the Midwest. And then at 4 o'clock, I would roll into the office and work until I couldn't work anymore. Usually wrapped up around 2 o'clock or so in the morning, and would go home, get a couple hours sleep, and go back and do it again. But it was really interesting because I got to really dig into what it took to buy a business and what you looked at. So we grew that business and wound up selling that business to GE. And so GE Medical Systems. And then we started another business that while we were at GE, we proposed to them that we started this within GE. And they said, no thanks. So we decided that we were all going to leave at once. So the four of us resigned at the same time, and we all started this business. Our first investor was the Cleveland Clinic Ventures. Our second investor was GE. And 3 years later, GE bought that business. And so what the second business was really interesting. It was a roll up. And so we bought, I believe, 12 companies over the course of 18 months, rolled them all together. And so what I realized is a company like GE or some big company, they're not going to go out and buy $1 million company or even a $2 million or $5 million company. It's just too expensive for them to even do the due diligence. So we rolled them all together and then sold them the larger package, which was a dozen companies that were all complementary that helped their business. And that's a multi-billion-dollar business for GE now. And so after that, I did a turnaround at a bioinformatics company, and that's when I kind of changed in direction from healthcare and kind of the illness business to more the wellness business. And at the time, we worked on a project with the Human Genome Project, doing some software for that. And then did a medical device turnaround, and then did some consulting with an investment bank, and just kind of got my legs underneath me until the point where I guess it was 2006, I was approached, and we had done a number of turnarounds and exits and things like that. I finally got my bachelor's degree, but I got a call from a friend who was a CFO at a consumer products business that had kind of a biotech background, and and they asked me if I'd come in and kind of just take a look at their patent portfolio. And I looked and said, there's all these businesses within your IP and you're not doing them. You're a consumer products business. They had 9 different supplement SKUs for sale in about 50,000 stores around the country. And so the CEO asked me if I would start this ingredient business for them, where we would basically, rather than focusing on the consumer product, we would focus on this probiotic that was going to be an ingredient into other things. And so we started that in 2006. And, in a mere 11 years later, it was a long run, but we had to build a market. We had to build an industry around this particular type of probiotic bacteria. And we wound up selling that. We literally put a couple $1 million into the business to start it. We sold it for 155 million in 2017 to a company that I've worked with as an advisor ever since. And so it's been a fun journey. I've worked with lots and lots of entrepreneurs over the years. And so I started Growthways after we sold the last business, really to kind of focus on this methodology, which I found to be missing when people grow businesses. And that's, they don't know how to take ownership of their customers. They don't know how to appropriately brand their service or their product, and then not just brand it. Like, you can spend a lot of money on branding, but especially in the B2B world, you don't really have to if you do it right. And you use the media and you use content and you use things like that. It just, it allowed us to develop this methodology that ultimately became Growthways. And then now we, do workshops and cohorts and all kinds of good stuff to help people learn this particular methodology and help them turn their business from what it is now to what they want it to be in the future.
Yeah, great. I mean, like, well, one, your storyline reminds me a lot about Mike Ross. All right. I don't know. Are you familiar with Mike Ross from Suits?
A little bit, yeah.
I say that a bit because, he was he wanted to be a lawyer, but he didn't go to school to be a lawyer. He was in the right place, right time, and showed
Yeah.
initiative and confidence to, start working for one of the number one law firms, at that time,
Yeah.
and he became just such a killer lawyer from that show, and so, it's coincident your name is also Michael, but that Ross energy. And, it's so great. You sent an email for something you knew nothing about and just said, "Hey, look, I can help at, the mere age at 25." And that was
I
what.
would just let me interrupt you. I would love to say I've sent an email, but this was, let's say, 1993. There was no sending an email. I literally wrote a memo, printed it out on my dot matrix printer, put it in an interoffice envelope, which back in the day, there used to be these yellow envelopes. You'd put your thing in there, you'd put this high security piece of red string around these two things. You'd stick it in the interoffice mail, and about a week or so later, the person that you sent it to might receive it. That's how that was our email system at the time. And so
Wow.
so it wasn't like you could just knock out it's not like you could text them,
Yeah, you put
you
a
know.
lot of you put a lot of energy and thought into that, and, like, you were fearless at the moment. You're just like, "Hey," he said yes, he says yes, he says no, he says no, and that's really what catapult you into your career to then start doing roll-ups and even getting multiple businesses acquired, so, yeah, that's amazing, that's great.
Yeah. And it's fun, and that's the thing. And what we're doing now is incredibly fun because I've always loved having a team. And I've always loved, like, for example, at our last company, when we sold it, we only had 32 people, but it's amazing. I think that there's been 6 businesses started from those 32 people have started 6 separate businesses, and none of them were entrepreneurs to begin with. But the goal that if every team I work with, whether they're employees or teams I worked with through coaching or through workshops or whatever, is what can we do to make every single one of these people fully understand the business? I mean, the receptionist in our company knew how to read a P&L by the time we were done because we're like, everybody needs to know why we're doing what we're doing. If somebody's going to ask you to do something, it's kind of nice to know why you're doing it. And so when people would have a question like, why do we care about, this particular supply contract, or why do we care about this little tiny customer when we've got this big customer? And you'd sit down, you'd explain the reasoning behind it. And so it got to the point where we would do things like on our weekly meetings, which we had weekly staff meetings, all hands, everybody was on. There were about 20 minutes. That's it. I mean, it was like our meeting of the week was 20 minutes long. Everybody did their top things, but we always identified, like, if somebody looked confused or if there was something going on where it's like somebody didn't really understand what was happening, or we would send out a report to everybody and they wouldn't understand it. We'd take that extra time to say, okay, here's how you read a balance sheet. I don't care whether you're an engineer or you're one of our microbiologists working in the lab. We want everybody to be heading in the same direction. So I have a blast like teaching this kind of stuff to anybody who wants to learn.
No, yes, yes, and I actually wanna dig a bit more into, like, your guardrail framework, right? When I think about
Mhm.
guardrails are just, like, constructs that kind of g
Yeah.
keep you from going somewhere dangerous, and in a business, you have a few different guardrails. You have, the financial
Yeah.
guardrails, you have the hiring guardrails, growth guardrails, operational guardrails. Tell me a bit more about, you guys' current guardrail framework.
Yeah. So the guardrailing framework is super easy. You know, I would say, get my book and read about it, but I'll also give you the cliff notes here real quick. I always suggest companies start with the destination in mind, whether you're writing a business plan and you're thinking about, how you're going to start your business, but what is the destination? When I say destination, it is who are you going to sell your business to specifically, name them, write them down, for how much and when. So if you have those pretty clearly identified, because I mean, if we're starting a business and asking investors to invest in a business, it's not because you're going to hand it down to their kids. It's because that investor expects a return on their investment. And so if you have that destination in mind, you can then back into your business. You can say, in our particular industry, for example, kind of the general space I work in, companies sell for about 13 times EBITDA. So you go, okay, I want to sell my business for $100 million. and I'm going to sell it. In 7 years. And here's the list of people that may buy it. Here's 4 strategics, a couple of private equity firms that may buy this business. Well, I need to generate X number of dollars in EBITDA in order to get that valuation. What do I need to do to grow the business to get to that? And then you build your guardrails around it. So your financial guardrails may be really narrow. You'd be like, here's the path that we're going to working. So we're gonna have pricing and a gross margin structure that allows us, if we get our sales to where they need to be, so that we're going to generate the EBITDA that we need. We're going to keep our cost structure in a way that we can grow the business, support the business, not kill everybody, but at the same time, we're not going to have excess overhead. And then you may have wider guardrails, that you give to your marketing or your go-to-market team or your sales team. So you're like, okay, and I've always been one where the price is the price. You don't let your salespeople negotiate pricing. You have a price. The price is it. So the guardrails are really narrow on sales, but how they work with their customers, whether it's face to face or virtually or whatever that case may be, whatever works best for that salesperson or that business development person and that particular customer works for me. So you can set really wide guardrails. One of the areas where I've really kept guardrails really narrow is when it comes time to hire. Knowing that you're going to exit a business eventually. One of the things that I encourage people to do is be extremely capital efficient. So don't waste money on anything. I just posted a thing on LinkedIn last week. I worked for a company. The company that we started that was a roll up. My office, I had 2 filing cabinets and I put a door over top of the filing cabinets. That was my desk. That was my desk when we sold the business too. I had really never had a need to go out and, spend even, $500 on a new desk because that door worked perfectly fine. But so capital efficiency is really important. One of the guardrails I take really, to heart, and I hope entrepreneurs do, is when it comes time to hire people, you have to make sure that the guardrails are set in such a way that the people are a perfect fit for your team. They may not have the industry experience or some of the things that you want, but cultural fit and a fit with where the business is going is super important. And you also need to make sure that for the people that may not make it after an acquisition, the back office people, maybe the people in finance that may be redundant if you're acquired, especially by a strategic, and they're going to roll you into their business. You need to make sure that you're not hiring people out of convenience, that you're like, hey, it'd be nice to have one more accounts payable person. You may be better off giving a pay increase to your controller so that he or she can handle your accounts payable, because the worst thing that can happen, at least in my mind, is you hire somebody and 2 years later they lose their job because you sold the business. So you get to your destination, but half of your team gets, bumped off the bus. And so I'd like to have as many people as possible to know that when we sell the business, the acquirer is going to want them all. There's not going to be any fallout. And so, I really encourage people to think really long and hard. Like, is this a long-term hire for me and for whoever acquires a business, or is this something that's just going to make my life easier for a little bit? And if that's the case, then you squeeze those guardrails in. And one of the things the guardrails do is they not only do they help you make decisions and keep you safe, but they help you say no to things. So if you have guardrails on a road, you don't just decide to take a right-hand turn real fast because you're going to shoot through the guardrail and you're going to go over the cliff and die. And so one of the most important things that I do when I do with like workshops with companies is I sit down and I'm like, look at all their initiatives that they're working on. And there's usually all these things they're working on. You're like, okay, what do you do? What do you really do? Let's focus on those things you do. And if it looks like it's veering off to the side of the road a little bit, you've got to hard press that brake and say no to that. Even though sometimes saying no is saying no to the more fun things or one of my pet peeves is the word pivot. Pivot to me means that's modern entrepreneur speak for I made bad decisions and now I have to do something else. And so if you keep your guardrails, tight enough or loose enough where you need to, you don't have to pivot because you can see the road ahead and you can see the curves and where the challenges are coming and you can make adjustments before it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I wanna hit on a couple points you made.
Sure.
Like, put the goal first. Or I like to use all the time. Right when you get in a car and you're going somewhere new,
Yeah.
first thing you do is put in where you're going, because
Mm.
otherwise GPS can't lead you there. So the goal is what helps you create your guardrails, because the guardrails only need to follow the goal in which you have in place.
Yeah.
And that's what enables you to be able to make the right decisions, know what to say no to, and know how to redirect rather than pivot, but redirect when need be.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, cool. I always I want to shift gears here. I love to ask, like, we were creating a data set of for founders, entrepreneurs, people who've exited companies,
Yeah.
because we want to figure out what are the same things that founders across all these lanes, what are the things that they're like falling into in order to make, the best decisions possible. And I truly believe that the better decision maker you are, the better business owner you are.
Oh,
Because that's all you're making a series of decisions every day.
yeah, that's really all business is, right? Is deciding to do something. You decide to start a business. You decide to, you decide that this is going to be a customer. This is not going to be a customer. You decide
Yeah.
what products you're going to sell. And you decide how you're going to sell them. And so, I think a lot of times, founders get stuck in this trap of they have too many things going on. I'm a big believer in simplifying until it's almost painful. I'm always trying to make things more efficient and more simple. Whether it's with life and having a meditation practice and using mindfulness in the way that I work. The things I do in my personal life or in business. It's kind of like, let's keep things kind of simple, because like I know some people that are super successful and they own 4 houses and they have staffs and all this other stuff. And I tell you, their lives may seem pretty neat on the outside, but nothing worse than that call that, hey, your vacation home in Tahoe just had its roof blown off. It's like, who really needs that hassle? And when it comes to business, it's the same thing. It's like, do you really need things that are going to overcomplicate your life or overcomplicate your business? One of the examples I use all the time is Notion. I decided I was going to use Notion a bit back. And so I found myself basically fiddling with motion or Notion all day long, trying to get it just right. And finally I just tossed the whole thing and was like, this is causing me more. I was having like option fatigue. And so I went back to the process that I've used, and the process works very well. And so it's like, why would I not? And so now we're using, AI tools and things like that allow us to take these simple processes that I've used over time and automate them so that we can, get more done and, provide more services for our clients. But it is funny, decisions are everything.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree as well. And look, I had my Notion phase too. Notion, you just have a whole bunch of nodes everywhere and information everywhere. It's so confusing over time. And once you finalize it, it's like super cool, but it's still nothing autonomous about it. Like it's still just at the end of the day, a pretty dashboard,
Yeah.
even with it working perfectly. And yeah, that I mean, I even love that you guys are implementing AI into, those manual processes that work. But like, can we optimize them with AI? Right? And that's a bit about more what we do at So Ready, building out operating systems for companies where it's a lot of the data is super fragmented when we're coming into things
Yeah.
like CRM. They might have some data in a CRM, but then their project management tools somewhere else. So then there's a gap in communication between the back team, and then communicating back and forth with the customers. And
Yeah.
there's always just data everywhere, and like having some sort of agency tool or just at least a project management software at the lowest will allow for you to better streamline information that feeds back into those guardrails, that feeds back to that goal, and you
Yeah.
becoming the best decision maker that you need to be.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's we just recently, so we do a lot of workshops, and so we do these guardrailing workshops. They're 1 day, 2 days, whatever it takes. And so, but so the business sends us a lot of information ahead of time, from everything from cap tables to where they're at with investors to their sales presentations, their pipelines, their org charts, all this kind of stuff. And so it used to be quite a slog to go through all of this stuff because, everybody formats things differently. You're kind of like looking at their forecast, trying to figure out what the heck they're trying to say here. And so we built a model that allows us to just drop all these things into the model, and it then prepares for us all of the information we need for the workshop. And so we come into the workshop And it's hysterical how often we'll walk into a business almost every single time. We'll walk in and they'll be like, okay, you've known our business for, what, a week, 2 weeks? Yes, and you have encapsulated our business more cleanly than we possibly could during this 1 day workshop. And that's because we've been able to take all of their information impartially, put it through a system that's got all the learnings of, 30 years plus of stuff in it. And
Yeah.
then the output is then a good workshop, so that it's not a workshop full of taking notes and doing all this other stuff. We even use an AI transcription device that actually records the entire day or 2 days worth of workshop, and incorporates then the full context of the conversation into the outputs. And so you don't miss those little nuances, because sometimes what you'll find is it's the little things that are said often, but they're kind of like throwaway kind of conversations. But those are the things that really ultimately may be the thing that really shape in the business. And it may be a personal thing that's kind of hanging out in the background somewhere, that all of a sudden you flag it and you're like, we need to address this particular, whatever this issue is, so that we can, get on with growing your business in the right direction.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
The transcription tools are definitely something that I love. I always, on the calls, having the note taker, like
Yeah.
having your Fathom AI note taker, or if you're in person using Otter, or even like the bare minimum you can always do. I always like to like free options, just voice memos. Voice memos even
Yeah.
just transcribe nowadays now, right?
I know.
And so,
It's
like, being
crazy.
able to get those points and have your transcription and be able to go back and forth with AI and, like, basically build a coach from even just a 1 to 2 day workshop
Yeah.
and gather all that information in one place is super duper cool.
Yeah.
So
It's
I
nice.
just wanna wrap up here with the operator stack, back to that data set. I'm gonna run through these questions pretty quickly. It's only 5
Sure.
questions, Michael.
Yeah.
I'll ask you a question, you give me the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this one, I think I might know the answer to, but I'll reiterate it because it's part of our data set. So when you're making a high stakes decision, what's the first principle that you rely on?
Take us to our destination.
So I expected. Does it take us to our destination? Perfect. Okay, now what's the most common bottleneck that you see that consistently prevents companies from scaling effectively?
Too many options. It's almost always too many options, and not heading in the direction, of the destination, or ignoring the rules that they set when they were setting their guardrails, or not having guardrails. I mean, most companies have no guardrails around decisions. I mean, big companies, small companies, one person companies to, 100,000 person companies have very few rules around decision making.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Okay. And then going back to hiring, when you are evaluating leadership teams, like what's one signal that tells you that someone's A+ talent?
I think it's typically, I'll give you one quick example. I was interviewing somebody recently, and they used the word or the term growth mindset. A plus right there. And especially it was a young person, and I was like, oh, you've read the book. You understand a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And that growth mindset, and constantly be learning, and constantly be willing to learn, and be willing to take constructive criticism, and also just general kindness. And so I find gratitude and kindness, and, a willingness to learn, to be just about the most important things you can have.
Yeah. I had a double major in college for psychology and biology, and that was one of the first frameworks that they taught. They taught about having a growth versus fixed mindset, and I genuinely believe that that is
Yeah.
foundational to a belief system on whether or not you'll continue growing or you'll be stopped by your own subconscious. Like a fixed mindset just means you're just stuck in your own perspective or perception
Yeah.
of the world, and you're not willing to grow.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. I love that. Lastly, here, what's a mistake that you see founders or executives repeating over and over again and it costs them the most?
One of the ones I see really often is spending too much time branding the company or the founder. There's so much time that is spent by founders often, especially when they're kind of, they're like really, let's just call it, full of themselves, and they're like looking at influencer world and things like that. And so they spend too much time on a company logo, or the company, image, or their own whatever, rather than the product or service that they sell. Because ultimately, when you sell that business, you're going to go away more than likely, and the name of the company is probably going to go away. So, so don't get too attached to what it is you're building as a company, but be very attached to the service or product that you're delivering and really, really love your customers because you can't lose if you love your customers and they love you and you focus on the product rather than who you are.
Yeah, so in other words, too much social proof, but just not enough proof.
Exactly.
Cool. Cool. Well, Michael, look, it's been a pleasure having you today. I would, love to share the links below for, your book for people to check you out. Where can they find you?
Growthways.com.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really
You
enjoyed
got
you
it.
coming on today.
Thank you.